This episode will contain some descriptions and details that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. London, 1888. The largest city in the world. A place of empire and innovation, but also of poverty, overcrowding, and despair. The British Empire was at its peak. The wealth of colonies flooded into London, but it was unevenly distributed. While the aristocracy dined in opulence, entire families in the East End starved. The East End, especially Whitechapel and Spitalfields, was a world apart. While the West End glittered with wealth and power, the East End festered with the consequences of rapid industrialization. Whitechapel was a maze of narrow alleys and decaying tenements. Over 80,000 people were crammed into just a few square miles. Many lived in common lodging houses, over 200 in the district alone, where a few pennies bought a shared bed or even just floor space for the night. Unemployment, crime, and alcoholism were rampant. The stench of open sewers filled the air. In some streets, entire families slept in one room, surrounded by vermin and filth. The mortality rate was among the highest in Europe. Petty crime thrived. Pickpocketing, street fights, drunken brawls, and theft were daily occurrences. Gang activity and protection rackets controlled some streets. Police often found themselves overwhelmed, with few resources and little trust from the local population. Murder was not unknown, but many victims were unnamed, their deaths uninvestigated. Corruption within police forces and low literacy rates made record-keeping unreliable. Medical care was inaccessible for the poor, and hospitals were viewed with fear. In the midst of this hardship, waves of Jewish immigrants fleeing pogroms in Eastern Europe had begun to settle in Whitechapel, forming tight-knit communities. But this influx also ignited ethnic tensions. Xenophobia and anti-Semitic sentiment were widespread, with immigrants often blamed for the worsening housing crisis and rising crime. In 1888 alone, over 5,000 Russian and Polish Jews arrived in Whitechapel. They brought with them new customs, languages, and religions, unsettling many native-born Londoners who already felt squeezed by poverty. Women, especially, bore the brunt of this urban struggle. Widows, single mothers, and aging laborers often found themselves with no options. Many turned to prostitution, sometimes only temporarily, to afford food or lodging. Violence against women was common and rarely punished. The 1886 Metropolitan Police Report estimated that 1 in every 12 women in Whitechapel engaged in some form of sex work. These women lived transient lives, moving from doss house to doss house, often under assumed names. They were ignored by society, invisible to the authorities until their brutal murders made headlines. It was a place where the line between life and death was razor thin. Law enforcement was overstretched. Police walked their beats through fog and fear, but crime festered in the shadows. Amid this chaos, something worse emerged. A figure who would take advantage of the fear, the darkness, and the anonymity of the slums. A killer who would come to be known as Jack the Ripper. Between August and November of 1888, 5 women were murdered in the East End of London with brutal, precise violence. Known as the Canonical Five, their names were Mary Ann Nicholls, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Katherine Edeto, and Mary Jane Kelly. Each was a victim not only of a murderer, but of a society that had failed them. These were not random killings. The victims were all impoverished, all women, and most engaged in sex work. The killer struck under cover of darkness, in the early hours of the morning, vanishing before police could arrive. Forensic science was in its infancy. Crime scenes were not cordoned off. Crowds often trampled crucial evidence. Police used whistles, not radios. Fingerprints were not yet in common use. Investigations relied on witnesses, confessions, and sheer luck. Dr. Thomas Bond, the police surgeon, stated in a report,
"All 5 murders were no doubt committed by the same hand. The throat in each case was slashed from left to right. The mutilations indicate considerable anatomical knowledge."
Despite this, the police were divided. Some believed the killer was a butcher or medical student. Others thought he might be a foreigner. Inspector Frederick Aberline, the senior officer on the case, once remarked,
"The only thing we know for sure is that we know nothing."
Public fear was palpable. Crowds swarmed crime scenes, demanding answers. Newspapers printed every grisly detail. Letters, claiming to be from the killer, flooded in, some hoaxes, others chillingly plausible. The most infamous was signed Jack the Ripper. London had seen murders before, but never like this, never with such brutality, never with such mystery. And the worst was yet to come. Before we unravel the suspects or question the identity of Jack the Ripper, we must first understand the men who tried to catch him, the police. Their job in 1888 was unlike anything modern forces would recognize. The Whitechapel murders didn't just horrify the public, they overwhelmed a system already stretched thin. The Victorian policeman, often referred to simply as a bobby, was the face of law and order in the chaotic, narrow alleys of London's East End. Most officers were working-class men themselves, often recruited from rural backgrounds. They were poorly paid. An average constable made about 24 to 30 shillings per week, barely enough to support a family in the expensive, bustling capital. Promotions were rare, and misconduct, even trivial, could result in instant dismissal. Their daily beats were grueling. A constable's patrol could span up to 20 miles per shift. They walked these treacherous routes alone, mostly unarmed, through alleys filled with criminals, drunks, violent gangs, and the hopelessly impoverished. Their beat logs had to be signed every hour at fixed points called police pillars. Any delay or missing signature could get them suspended. In Whitechapel, police faced daily abuse. Locals often distrusted or outright despised them, especially among the impoverished, the immigrant communities, and those who lived by illegal trades. Some saw the police as pawns of the elite, men who turned a blind eye to suffering but cracked down on petty crimes. Officers were routinely pelted with stones, spat at, or mocked as they passed. Then came the Ripper. With each new murder, the pressure mounted. Senior officers like Detective Inspector Edmund Reed, Inspector Frederick Aberline, and Commissioner Sir Charles Warren found themselves in the eye of a growing storm. They were scrutinized not only by newspapers and the public, but also by politicians eager to deflect blame. One editorial in the Times read,
"A few more murders, and it will be impossible to pass through Whitechapel unarmed. What are the police doing?"
Detectives had few tools at their disposal. No fingerprinting, no forensic labs, no blood analysis. Crime scenes were easily contaminated, often trampled by crowds before officers could secure them. Witness accounts varied wildly. Many locals feared coming forward, and some gave false information for notoriety or money. The press didn't help. Papers printed wild theories, hoaxes, and forged letters claiming to be from the killer. The infamous "Dear Boss" letter was taken seriously, but many believe that this may have been a cruel journalist's prank. Police time was wasted chasing ghosts and fabricated clues. Meanwhile, officers worked day and night. Detective Aberline was said to sleep just a few hours a night during the height of the murders. Tensions rose within Scotland Yard. Commissioner Warren, already unpopular, was blamed for mishandling the investigation. His eventual resignation in November 1888 only deepened public disillusionment. In hindsight, the police never stood a chance. They were brave men, dedicated and tenacious, but woefully underprepared for a case that demanded 21st century methods in a 19th century world. As one anonymous constable later said,
"We had our boots, our truncheons, and our eyes. The Ripper had the night.
August 31st, 1888, at 3:40 a.m., a carman named Charles Cross stumbled upon what he thought was a bundle of rags in Bucks Row. It was not. It was the body of Mary Ann Nicholls. Known to friends as Polly, Mary Ann was 43 years old. She had lived a life plagued by poverty, alcoholism, and homelessness. She had 5 children, but estrangement from her husband and the harsh realities of East End life forced her into casual prostitution. Polly had been seen earlier that night at a lodging house, turned away for not having the 4pence needed for a bed. She joked,
"I'll soon get my DOS money. See what a jolly bonnet I've got now."
It was the last time she was seen alive. When Police Constable John Neal arrived, he found her lying on her back, skirts raised. Her throat had been slashed twice from left to right, severing the windpipe and blood vessels. Later examination revealed her abdomen had been deeply slashed, the wounds so savage they revealed internal organs. Dr. Llewellyn, the attending physician, stated,
The injuries were made by the same instrument, a long, strong knife, in a ferocious attack.
Dr. George Bagster Phillips, the police surgeon, conducted the post-mortem and detailed,
The victim's throat was cut so deeply that the carotid arteries and jugular veins were severed. There was no attempt to silence her before death, as the wounds were inflicted swiftly and savagely.
But the horror did not end there. The abdomen was partially mutilated, with the uterus and parts of the bladder removed, which many thought that this was an indication of knowledge of human anatomy. There were no screams heard. The area, though industrial and populated, was deathly quiet at that hour. The killer had moved in the shadows and vanished. The murder shocked Whitechapel. The East London Advertiser ran the headline,
Horrible murder in Bucks Row. Woman found butchered.
Police Superintendent Charles Warren issued warnings, and patrols increased, but the killer remained elusive. Police were baffled. They interviewed local residents and known criminals, but found no leads. Inspector Aberline, newly assigned from Scotland Yard, took over the case, unaware this would be just the beginning. September 8th, 1888. Just over a week after Mary Ann Nicholls' murder, the Ripper struck again. At 6 a.m., Annie Chapman's body was found in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. She had been savagely murdered, her throat cut so deeply that it nearly severed her head. Her abdomen had been opened, and part of her uterus removed. Annie was 47. The daughter of a soldier, she had once lived a more stable life. But like Polly Nicholls, alcoholism and tragedy had led her to the East End streets. That morning, she had tried to secure a bed in a lodging house, but was turned away.
"I haven't got the money,"
she said.
"but don't let it worry you. I shall soon be back."
She never returned. Elizabeth Long, a local resident, reported seeing Annie with a man outside 29 Hanbury Street around 5:30 a.m. She described him as foreign-looking, with dark hair and a shabby appearance. Dr. George Bagster Phillips conducted the post-mortem. He found that the uterus had been skillfully removed, suggesting anatomical knowledge. He wrote,
There were indications of a certain degree of anatomical skill. The injuries were not haphazard.
The murder scene was horrific. Her entrails were placed over her shoulder. Coins and a piece of muslin were laid at her feet. The killer had taken his time, possibly as much as 30 minutes. The police were under pressure. Inspector Aberline led the investigation, canvassing local butchers, surgeons, and slaughterhouses. Rumors swirled that the killer might be a foreigner, a lunatic, or even a midwife. Newspapers fanned the flames. The Illustrated Police News ran lurid sketches and declared,
The monster of Whitechapel stalks again.
Fear began to grip the city. Women were warned not to walk alone. Vigilante groups roamed the streets, eager for justice. September 30th, 1888, the night of the double event. At approximately 1 a.m., the body of 45-year-old Elizabeth Stride was discovered in Dutfield's yard off Berner Street. Elizabeth, born Elizabeth Gustafsdotter in Sweden, had lived a hard life. She had moved to London in the 1860s, married a ship's carpenter, but had since fallen into poverty and casual prostitution after their separation. That evening, she had been seen walking with several different men. She told one acquaintance,
I'm just waiting for a gentleman. I won't be long.
Louis Diemschitz, steward of a local socialist club, was returning home when his horse suddenly veered away from something in the darkness. Lighting a match, he saw a woman's body lying in the yard. Elizabeth's throat had been slashed deeply from left to right. But unlike the other Ripper victims, there were no mutilations to her abdomen or body. Dr. Frederick Blackwell arrived at the scene and concluded,
Death must have been instantaneous. She was still bleeding when found.
This detail led police to a chilling conclusion. The killer had likely been interrupted. The arrival of Diemschitz may have forced him to flee before he could complete his gruesome ritual. Just minutes earlier, several witnesses reported seeing Stride with a man in the vicinity. Descriptions varied. Some said he was short and stocky, with a dark moustache. Others described him as nervous, tugging at a parcel wrapped in newspaper. Inspector Edmund Reed took charge of the investigation, but conflicting witness accounts led nowhere. The press seized on the lack of mutilation, speculating whether this was truly the work of the Ripper or a copycat. The Star newspaper wrote,
The fiend has returned to the East End, and the streets now belong to terror.
But the night was not over. Less than an hour later, the Ripper would strike again. And this time, his brutality would shock even seasoned detectives. September 30th, 1888. Less than an hour after Elizabeth Stride's body was discovered, the killer struck again, and this time he had time to finish. At 1:44 a.m., PC Edward Watkins discovered the mutilated body of Katherine Edeto in Mitre Square, within the jurisdiction of the City of London Police. Unlike the other Ripper crimes, this one fell under a separate police force, adding complexity to the investigation. Katherine Edeto was 46, the mother of 3 children, and known for her sharp wit and singing voice. She had lived with her common-law partner, John Kelly, and like the other victims, she struggled with poverty and alcohol. Just hours earlier, she had been arrested for drunkenness and held at Bishopsgate Police Station. At 1 a.m., she was released. Her last recorded words to the officer were,
Cheerio, old cock.
Within 45 minutes, she was dead. Her body was found in the darkened corner of Mitre Square. Her throat had been deeply cut, severing the windpipe and major blood vessels. Her face was slashed in a frenzy, the tip of her nose removed, a V carved into each cheek, and eyelids partially sliced. Her abdomen had been ripped open. Her intestines were drawn out and placed over her right shoulder. Her left kidney and most of her uterus had been removed and taken. Dr. Frederick Gordon Brown, the city police surgeon, concluded,
The work was that of someone who knew where to find the organs, done with speed and some anatomical knowledge.
Blood still trickled from the wounds. Time was tight, but the killer had completed his terrible ritual and slipped away into the shadows. Police scoured the area. A blood-stained apron was found in Goulston Street, a 10-minute walk from Mitre Square. Above it, scrawled in chalk on a wall, was a message.
The Jews, spelt J-U-W-E-S, are the men that will not be blamed for nothing.
Fearing anti-Semitic riots, Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren ordered the writing to be erased before dawn. This decision remains controversial. Many believed it could have been a vital clue. The public, already shaken by the earlier murder of Elizabeth Stride, now fell into panic. The Times wrote,
"It is impossible to exaggerate the excitement which the crimes have aroused. London is terror-stricken."
This was the killer's boldest move. 2 victims in one night, under 2 police jurisdictions, with virtually no trace left behind. The Ripper was sending a message: he could strike where he wanted, when he wanted, and no one could stop him. November 9th, 1888. The Ripper's savagery reached its peak. Mary Jane Kelly, just 25 years old, was found brutally murdered in her small one-room lodging at 13 Miller's Court. She was the youngest of the Canonical Five victims, and the only one killed indoors. This gave the killer time, and he used it. Mary had a mysterious past. She claimed to have been born in Ireland, spent time in Cardiff, and worked in a high-class West End brothel before falling into destitution. She was known for her beauty and her singing voice, often heard softly singing Irish ballads through her window. On the night of her murder, Mary was seen returning home around 11:45 p.m. with a man. The next day, her landlord, John McCarthy, sent an assistant to collect overdue rent. What he saw through the broken window horrified him. The police broke in. What they found was beyond comprehension. Mary's body was mutilated beyond recognition. Her throat was slashed down to the spine. Her face was hacked and flayed. Her breasts were cut off. Her abdomen was emptied, all her internal organs removed and placed about the bed. Her heart was missing. Dr. Thomas Bond, a senior police surgeon, conducted the post-mortem. In his report, he wrote,
"The whole of the surface of the abdomen and thighs was removed, and the abdominal cavity emptied of its viscera. The flaps of skin from the thighs and abdomen were placed on the bedside table."
He concluded,
"In character, this murder exceeds in savagery any of those preceding it."
Mary's murder was the most grotesque. Yet unlike the others, it yielded even fewer clues. No one heard screams. No one saw anyone leave. The killer vanished without a trace. Inspector Aberline was devastated. In a memo, he admitted,
I have seen all the horrors of war, but nothing could have prepared me for this.
The press exploded. The Pall Mall Gazette wrote,
"The demon has returned, more fiendish than ever. This is no man, but a monster with a scalpel."
It is no exaggeration to say that the crime scene of Mary Jane Kelly was the stuff of nightmares. The vicious violence and gory aftermath on show was beyond anything the police had ever seen before. The sight likely haunted many of the attending officers for the rest of their days. You can look at photos of Mary Jane Kelly's body at the crime scene online. However, be warned, and seek these out with extreme caution. Because even as old and unclear as the images are, they are still an extremely disturbing sight to behold, and show a snapshot of how violent and evil an act can be. Public trust in the police shattered. Whitechapel erupted in fear. Women refused to go out at night. Citizens formed vigilante patrols. Every stranger was eyed with suspicion. And then it stopped. No more letters. No more bodies. Was Mary Kelly the final victim? Or did the killer move elsewhere, change tactics, or die? No one knew. The case, already infamous, slipped into legend. The autumn of terror had ended. But the shadow of Jack the Ripper would loom for years to come. There are 2 other murders that need discussion. Many experts over the years have said that these 2 murders are linked to the Jack the Ripper killings. Others say that they are the beginning to what is known as the Whitechapel murders, but do not have the same modus operandi as the murders of the Canonical Five. However, they may have been a bloody prelude to the horrors yet to come. Before the Canonical Five, there was Emma Elizabeth Smith. Her murder, often overshadowed by the horrors that followed, may have been the first strike in the shadowy campaign of fear that gripped the East End. April 3rd, 1888. In the early hours, 45-year-old Emma Smith was brutally attacked near Osborne Street. A known resident of a lodging house at 18 George Street, Emma had long struggled with poverty and survived by working as a casual prostitute. She was assaulted by multiple assailants, beaten and violated with a blunt object, so savagely that she was left barely alive. Remarkably, she managed to stagger back to her lodging house and told the deputy keeper, Mary Russell, what had happened.
She said she had been set upon by 2 or 3 men, one of whom was a youth.
Russell testified.
She was bleeding and in terrible pain.
Smith was taken to London Hospital, where she lingered for nearly 24 hours. She succumbed to peritonitis caused by the injuries. The post-mortem confirmed the use of a blunt object during the assault, and her death certificate listed cause of death as peritonitis due to a ruptured peritoneum. Detective Inspector Edmund Reed of the H Division investigated the case. Despite efforts, no suspects were ever caught. The fact that Emma named multiple attackers led police to believe the assault may have been gang-related, part of the criminal extortion rings that preyed on prostitutes in Whitechapel. Despite this, some modern researchers suggest Emma Smith could have been the first victim of Jack the Ripper, operating with others early on, or evolving from less targeted attacks. Her death occurred only 5 months before the murder of Mary Ann Nicholls. Many other experts refute this, however, due to Emma Smith stating herself that she was attacked by multiple men, and also that this murder did not fit the modus operandi of the other murders linked to Jack the Ripper. In his 1888 report, Chief Inspector West wrote,
There is no reason to connect this murder to the recent series, though its brutality is notable.
The East London Observer covered her death with less sensationalism than later crimes.
Another unfortunate has met her end in the desolate streets of Whitechapel.
In retrospect, Emma Smith's death marked a turning point, a grim foreshadowing of the horrors to come. Whether a Ripper victim or not, her case embodies the violence, vulnerability, and invisibility faced by women in Victorian Whitechapel. Her name deserves remembrance in the tale of Jack the Ripper, as perhaps the first to fall in the Autumn of Terror. August 7th, 1888. Just 3 weeks before the murder of Mary Ann Nicholls, another woman was slain with shocking violence in Whitechapel, 39-year-old Martha Tabram. Her death is often cited by modern experts as a potential 6th victim of the Ripper, perhaps even the true beginning of his murderous spree. Martha was found at 5 a.m. by a resident of George Yard Buildings, lying in a pool of blood on the first-floor landing. Her body was discovered face-up, legs spread, her clothing disheveled. She had suffered 39 stab wounds, primarily to the chest, abdomen, neck, and genital area. Dr. Timothy Killeen, the police surgeon who examined the body, stated,
The wounds varied in depth and direction. Some were likely caused by a penknife, others by a longer blade. One pierced the sternum and would have required great force.
The savagery suggested a frenzied, deeply personal assault. However, unlike the later canonical victims, Martha had not been mutilated with the same anatomical precision that characterized the Ripper's later crimes. Martha Tabram had led a difficult life. She had been estranged from her husband, lived in lodging houses, and struggled with alcoholism. She had last been seen on the evening of August 6th, drinking with 2 soldiers, a key clue that would spark a fruitless military inquiry. The Daily Telegraph reported,
A woman of ill fame done to death in the shadows of the barracks. It is a dark stain upon our streets and guardians.
Detective Inspector Edmund Reed led the investigation, interviewing dozens of witnesses. A woman known as Pearly Pole identified the soldiers she and Martha had been with, but efforts to match them to the crime failed. Theories abound. Was Martha a victim of drunken rage, gang violence, or the Ripper himself? still experimenting with methods? Some experts believe the lack of organ removal or throat slashing excludes her from the Canonical Five. Others, like author Philip Sugden, argue that the ferocity and targeting of a lone prostitute places her squarely in the Ripper's shadow. Sir Melville Macnaghten later wrote,
Tabram's death differed markedly from the others, but the locality and class of victim do not allow us to wholly dismiss her.
The local press reported widespread panic after her murder. Residents of George Yard began carrying whistles and walking in groups after dark. The Pall Mall Gazette wrote,
The area teeters on the edge of dread. Whispers of a phantom attacker have taken root.
In a coroner's inquest led by Mr. George Collier, the jury returned a verdict of murder by person or persons unknown, a phrase that would become hauntingly familiar. Martha's body was buried in an unmarked grave in the City of London Cemetery in Manor Park. A memorial plaque was later erected to acknowledge her as a possible victim of the Ripper. In the words of historian Donald Rumbelow,
If she was not his first victim, she was surely his rehearsal.
whatever the truth, Martha Tabram's savage end cast a grim pall over George Yard. It was a murder that left the police baffled and may have been Jack the Ripper's rehearsal for the horrors to come. In the chaos that gripped London during the autumn of 1888, fear found a voice, one that taunted, mocked, and revelled in terror. A series of letters, sent to the police and newspapers, claimed to be from the killer himself. Whether hoaxes or not, they became part of the legend. The first letter to gain public attention was received by the Central News Agency on September 27, 1888. It was signed,
Yours truly, Jack the Ripper.
This is where the name was born.
Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue, and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. Ha ha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers, just for jolly. Wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out, straight. My knife's so nice and sharp. I want to get to work right away, if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands. Curse it, no luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha.
Written in red ink, with chilling confidence, the Dear Boss letter described details only the killer might have known, or so it seemed. Days later, when the double event occurred, the murders of Elizabeth Stride and Katherine Edeto, the letter was reprinted in newspapers across London. Just days after that, a small package arrived. Inside was half a human kidney, preserved in alcohol.
From hell. Mr. Lusk, sir, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. The other piece I fried and ate it. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out, if you only wait a while longer. Catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk.
This was the infamous From Hell letter, addressed to George Lusk, head of the local vigilante group, the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. Doctors confirmed the kidney was human, and possibly from a person who had Bright's disease, as Edo's did. But no definitive link could be proven. Hundreds of letters poured in. Many were pranks. Some may have been written by journalists to keep public interest high. Others were clearly from disturbed individuals seeking attention. But a few remained chilling in their tone, timing, and content. Inspector Aberline dismissed most of the letters as hoaxes, but admitted,
We cannot say with certainty which, if any, came from the hand of the murderer.
The public, meanwhile, was captivated. Newspaper circulation soared. Reporters raced to outdo each other with gruesome details and exclusive claims. Jack the Ripper wasn't just a killer. He was becoming myth. By the time Mary Jane Kelly was murdered, London was in a state of near hysteria. The police faced unprecedented public pressure. The press published every rumor. Political leaders demanded action. And yet, the killer remained at large. Scotland Yard was divided between the Metropolitan Police, led by Commissioner Sir Charles Warren, and the City of London Police, who had jurisdiction over parts of Edo's murder. The lack of cooperation between these two bodies severely hampered the investigation. The lead investigator in Whitechapel was Inspector Frederick Aberline, a seasoned officer who knew the East End well. Described as methodical and compassionate, Aberline poured his energy into identifying the killer. Despite enormous effort, over 2,000 people were interviewed, 80 detained, and 300 investigated, yet no suspect was ever charged. The police explored a vast range of theories. Was the Ripper a local man, familiar with the alleys and escape routes? Or a wealthy gentleman, slumming among the destitute? Did he have medical training? Aberline himself was skeptical of the medical theory, remarking,
I have not yet met the doctor who could have performed these mutilations in the dark with the speed and silence this man possessed.
Yet, other officials disagreed. Dr. Thomas Bond, who examined several victims, believed the murderer possessed anatomical knowledge and suffered from what he called
a condition of homicidal and erotic mania.
In response to growing panic, Sir Charles Warren banned rewards for information, a move that provoked outrage. He feared it would encourage false accusations and vigilantism. Meanwhile, the press stoked the flames. Papers like the Illustrated Police News published lurid illustrations of the murders. The Pall Mall Gazette printed open criticisms of police incompetence. The Times wrote,
The East End is now more afraid of crime than of starvation.
Public trust in the police eroded. People began patrolling the streets themselves. The Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, headed by George Lusk, even hired private detectives. And then, the murders stopped. After the horrific slaying of Mary Jane Kelly, there were no more killings attributed to the Ripper. Some believe he died, was imprisoned, or left the country. Others think he simply stopped. But the damage was done. The East End would never be the same, nor would the world's fascination with the mysterious killer. Jack the Ripper had vanished, but the mystery was only beginning to deepen. As the blood ran through the alleys of Whitechapel, so too did theories, wild, rational, or desperate. Who was Jack the Ripper? That question, unanswered for over a century, has spawned countless suspects, from butchers to barbers, royals to the criminally insane. By November of 1888, the Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police had interviewed over 2,000 people, investigated more than 300, and detained about 80, yet no charges were ever laid. Why? In part, it was the sheer anonymity of life in the East End. Thousands of transients passed through the lodging houses each night. Names changed. Faces vanished. Everyone was poor, and everyone was desperate. Detective Chief Inspector Frederick Aberline later remarked,
We were hunting a ghost. The man who struck without sound, vanished without trace, and left only horror behind.
The public, however, demanded answers. Newspapers offered theories daily. Some were plausible, others were pure invention. Let us explore the most prominent suspects, men whose lives and actions have been picked apart by historians and conspiracy theorists alike. Montague John Druitt, the suicidal barrister. Montague Druitt was a 31-year-old barrister and part-time schoolteacher. He came from a respectable middle-class family, but suffered from mental health issues. In December 1888, his body was pulled from the River Thames. He had been missing for weeks. A note was found suggesting suicide. Sir Melville Macnaghten, Assistant Chief Constable of CID, later wrote,
He was a doctor's son, of good education, and disappeared at the same time as the last murder.
Macnaghten's now famous memorandum claimed Druitt was sexually insane, and his family suspected him of being the killer, but no direct evidence links him to the crime scenes. Modern critics argue that the theory rested more on convenient timing than hard facts. Aaron Kosminski, the Mad Barber. Aaron Kosminski was a Polish Jewish immigrant living in Whitechapel. A hairdresser by trade, he suffered from severe mental illness, exhibiting paranoid and delusional behavior. He was institutionalized in an asylum in 1891, where he remained until his death. Kosminski was first named as a suspect by police in private memos, notably by Assistant Commissioner Sir Robert Anderson, who referred to a Polish Jew suspect known to the police. Anderson wrote in his memoirs, 1910,
The only person who ever had a good view of the murderer unhesitatingly identified the suspect, and he was a low-class Polish Jew.
But the eyewitness refused to testify. No formal charges were brought. In 2014, controversial DNA analysis on a shawl allegedly found at a Ripper crime scene claimed to link Kosminski to the murders. Critics have questioned the chain of custody and scientific validity of that test. Michael Ostrog, the criminal con artist. Ostrog was a Russian-born conman, thief, and self-proclaimed doctor. He had a long history of deception and had spent time in asylums. He was named as a suspect in the same Macnaghten memorandum as Druitt and Kosminski, but there is no evidence placing him in London during the murders. Most modern ripperologists discount Ostrog as a viable suspect, seeing him more as a dangerous eccentric than a methodical killer. Prince Albert Victor, the royal conspiracy. The most salacious theory involves Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence, grandson to Queen Victoria. Known as Eddie, he was linked to whispers of scandal and incompetence, but there is no credible evidence placing him near the crime scenes. The royal conspiracy theory flourished in the 1970s and 80s, thanks to authors like Stephen Knight, who claimed the murders were part of a Masonic cover-up to protect the monarchy from scandal. Historians have debunked most of this theory, pointing out that Prince Eddie was not even in London during several of the murders. Sir William Gull, another royal conspiracy. One of the most enduring and controversial theories involves a royal conspiracy. Proponents claim that Sir William Gull, physician to Queen Victoria, helped silence a scandal involving Prince Albert Victor, the Queen's grandson, who allegedly fathered a child with a Catholic shopgirl. In this theory, the murders were orchestrated to silence witnesses, all of whom were prostitutes. Immortalized in films and books, this theory is highly elaborate and highly speculative. There is no solid evidence connecting Gull or the royal family to the crimes. George Chapman, the poisoner. Born Severin Klasowski, George Chapman later moved to London and worked as a barber surgeon. Between 1897 and 1902, he poisoned 3 of his wives and was hanged for murder. Inspector Aberline believed Chapman was the Ripper. Yet Chapman's known killings involved poison, not knives. Still, his background in surgery, violent tendencies, and presence in Whitechapel during the murders keep him on the list. There is another suspect that deserves a more in-depth discussion, one that in recent years has gained a lot of attention, and even became a world-famous author's personal project, where millions of dollars of her own money, as well as her own time and dedication, led her to present her case to the world on the identity of who the Ripper was. Using a combination of modern deduction, criminal psychology, DNA analysis, and intense research, Patricia Cornwell published her findings in her international bestseller, Portrait of a Killer, Jack the Ripper, Case Closed. The Painter in the Shadows, Walter Sickert and Modern Obsession. In the fog of speculation that surrounds Jack the Ripper, no suspect has stirred as much modern controversy or fascination as Walter Richard Sickert. A respected British painter and a disciple of James Whistler, Sickert's dark, expressionist art and troubled personality would later cast him as a chilling figure in the Ripper canon. Born in 1860, Sickert was eccentric, brilliant, and morbidly fascinated by violence. He often painted scenes of women in vulnerable or dead-looking positions, what some have called post-coital or post-mortem. His Camden Town series, in particular, features somber, ambiguous depictions of naked women in dingy bedrooms, observed by silent, looming men. But Sickert wasn't named a suspect during the Victorian era. His connection to the Ripper only surfaced over a century later, with the 2002 publication of Portrait of a Killer by crime novelist Patricia Cornwell. Cornwell claimed to have solved the mystery. Her theory? That Walter Sickert was Jack the Ripper.
The evidence points not just towards Sickert being the killer,
She wrote,
but to his pleasure in mocking the police, the press, and the public with cruel correspondence and painted clues.
Cornwell's theory was as sensational as it was divisive. She purchased over 30 of Sickert's paintings, had them forensically tested, and spent millions hiring document examiners and DNA analysts. Her findings included DNA traces from Ripper letters that allegedly matched mitochondrial DNA from envelopes Sickert had once sealed. Similarities between Sickert's handwriting and the infamous From Hell letter. Thematic parallels between his art and the mutilations of the Ripper's victims. A theory that Sickert may have suffered a penile fistula, a deformity or surgery that left him impotent, potentially fueling misogynistic rage. Cornwell was also struck by Sickert's obsession with the Ripper case. He had created a painting titled Jack the Ripper's Bedroom, and reportedly stayed in a room in Camden that a landlady believed had once belonged to the killer. But critics quickly countered. Sickert had alibis. He was reportedly in France during some of the murders. And mitochondrial DNA is not unique. It can match thousands of people. Others argued that his art reflected the growing realism and psychological complexity of early modernism, not evidence of murder. Art historians and ripperologists alike questioned Cornwell's leap from circumstantial evidence to accusation.
It's a brilliant publicity stunt,
said Donald Rumbelow, author of The Complete Jack the Ripper.
but there's not a shred of hard evidence tying Sickert to the murders.
Still, Cornwell remained undeterred. In later interviews and updated editions of her book, she doubled down, stating,
I believe I have nailed the Ripper's identity. People just don't want to accept it because he was famous.
Other researchers have since explored the Sickert theory. Some suggest he was not the killer, but perhaps obsessed with the crimes. His paintings do evoke the East End's gloom and the psychology of voyeurism, guilt, and death. In one of his most haunting works, Ennui, a man stares at nothing, trapped in a flat with a woman slumped beside him. The scene oozes silence, despair, and ambiguity. Whether Sickert was a killer, an admirer, or merely a disturbed genius, his legacy now lives in the uneasy intersection between art and crime. A man who painted horror and possibly embodied it. Cornwell pointed to themes of misogyny and violence in Sickert's art, and alleged that paper from his studio matched the Ripper letters. But critics argue her evidence is circumstantial at best. Art historian Matthew Sturgis said,
It's a case built on assumptions, not proof.
Others point out that Sickert was likely in France during the murders. No credible historical link places him at the crime scenes. As Cornwell herself said,
"The trail is cold, but evil leaves a fingerprint in time."
Other notable suspects: James Maybrick, a Liverpool cotton merchant whose forged diary claimed he was the Ripper. Experts remain divided over its authenticity. Dr. Thomas Neil Cream, a convicted poisoner who supposedly whispered, "I am Jack," at his execution in 1892. However, he was imprisoned during the Whitechapel murders. In 1888, criminal profiling was non-existent. But in 1988, on the centenary of the killings, the FBI Behavioral Science Unit created a profile of Jack the Ripper. White male, mid-20s to mid-30s, local to the Whitechapel area. Likely had a job that allowed mobility and privacy, exhibited signs of mental instability and hatred toward women. This profile aligns loosely with suspects like Kosminski and Chapman, but cannot offer certainty. The truth is, we may never know who Jack the Ripper was. He may have been one of these men, or none of them. Each suspect opens a door into a different theory, each shaped by the fears, prejudices, and obsessions of its time. But the facts remain chillingly simple. 5 women were brutally murdered, their killer vanished into history. And behind the myth, the mystery still endures. The murders stopped, but the fear never did. The infamous name of Jack the Ripper spread far beyond the cobblestones of Whitechapel. Almost overnight, the killer gained global attention. Newspapers in New York, Paris, and Berlin reported on every detail. The idea of a single, psychotic killer striking without motive, leaving no trace, was a terrifying novelty in the Victorian world. The East End, once ignored, was now infamous. And the name Jack the Ripper became one of the first truly international media monsters. In the decades that followed, the Ripper case changed everything. Criminal profiling, forensic methodology, media coverage of crime, all evolved in response to what had happened in 1888. Scotland Yard's failures led to reforms in policing and record-keeping. A young field called criminal anthropology emerged as experts attempted to understand what kind of man could commit such atrocities. In 1894, Melville McNaughton, a senior police official, wrote a confidential memorandum naming 3 top suspects. His list would shape Ripperology for the next century. And then, the conspiracy theories began. By the early 20th century, the Whitechapel murders had become the subject of books, plays, films, and eventually, internet forums. Writers like Leonard Matters proposed that the Ripper was a doctor avenging his son's death from venereal disease. Others believed the Freemasons were involved, or that the killer was an American or a woman. The field of Ripperology was born, a mix of detective work, historical research, and obsession. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, even offered a theory of his own.
The criminal may have been a midwife. Escaping bloodstains would have been easily explained.
To this day, the murders are reenacted, debated, and analyzed. Dozens of books are published each year. Tours of Whitechapel still draw thousands of visitors. In the end, Jack the Ripper was never caught. No trial, no confession, no closure. He stepped out of the shadows, committed his atrocities, and disappeared, leaving behind a city gripped by fear and a mystery that endures to this day. Over 130 years have passed, yet the case still casts a long shadow over London's East End. We've explored the theories, the suspects, the science, but still, no name can be carved with certainty into history's ledger. But perhaps the real story lies not in the man who killed, but in the society that allowed these murders to happen, a world where poverty, prejudice, and desperation collided in narrow alleyways, where vulnerable women were ignored until it was too late, where fear turned into myth, and myth became one of the world's most famous unsolved crimes. Jack the Ripper is more than a killer. He is a mirror, reflecting the darkness within the age that bore him. And until we stop searching only for the man behind the knife, and start understanding the world he moved through, the true mystery will never be solved. Yet amid the speculation, one truth often gets lost. Innocent women were murdered. Not just victims, not just names on a list, but human beings with hopes, families, flaws, and dreams. In recent years, historians have pushed to shift the focus away from the killer and back to the victims of these truly horrific crimes. The infamous name of Jack the Ripper will never die. But perhaps, in understanding the past, we can finally give voice to those it silenced.
Emma Elizabeth Smith, 1843 to 1888, mother of 2. Martha Tabram, 1849 to 1888, mother of 2. Mary Ann Nicholls, 1845 to 1888, mother of 5. Annie Chapman, 1840 to 1888, mother of 3. Elizabeth Stride, 1843 to 1888, mother of 9, unconfirmed. Katherine Edeto, 1842 to 1888, mother of 3. Mary Jane Kelly, 1863 to 1888.
Whitechapel never forgot. Neither should we. Thank you for watching. Please join us next time for more journeys through the world's past. And always remember, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it.